was actually very intrigued when I was invited to this conference because I'm not known for speaking about polyamory. I actually have been known to speak out against the polyamoric community because when I first got involved in alternative sexualities, this was, way back in the olden days of the 90s, back when the sound of foreplay frequently was greeted with as we all cranked on our modems, and some of you are like, what's that? What's a modem? Because you are adorable and young. And so I was getting involved in kink and BDSM, and I want to talk about that. But what was interesting to me was how so many folks who had already achieved this enlightenment of alternative sexuality were so willing to tell the vanilla people, the heterosexual people, the heteronormative people, how boring and dry and unaware they were. And there was a certain fragment of the kink community who were also very poly, who were very eager to tell everyone, well, you just need to try it. Well, is jealousy what's holding you back? Love is infinite. Why are you so afraid to share? And I'm like, love may be infinite, but my calendar is quite finite. I have not quite learned how to bend time in that way yet. And so I'm so excited to see that there's so many more divergent voices being brought to the table when it comes to alternative sexuality. So yay you. And I'm so glad that you are all here. Part of the core of what I wanted to talk about today was what the fuck are we doing exactly at these conferences, right? Like, what does the world really need us? Right? What are we doing that actually helps the planet? What are we doing that actually furthers any agenda outside of talking about how cool and enlightened we are because we fuck multiple people on the same week, right? Because we're doing cool shit that other people aren't doing, how much better are we than the poor other people who are not enlightened in doing so, yeah? And I'm here just to tell you, really, actually, the world doesn't need us. The planet doesn't need us. They don't need another sexuality conference. They don't need another group of people telling them how to fuck, When I was about 15 years old, I engaged in my first relationship, and when I was 16 years old, I engaged in my first poly relationship. There was no book. No one told me how to fuck my boyfriend and my best friend, right? We just managed somehow to figure out how to do that. And it was kind of awesome, and it was pretty amazing. So I had my boyfriend, and I had a girlfriend when I was 16, and that was fan-fucking-tastic. And we did not have books, and yet, we managed to negotiate a relationship that was so fucking light years ahead of what I have even to this day seen among adults who have taken classes and doing the books, that it's remarkable. We negotiated boundaries and limits. We could all make out together, but if they were going to be making out without me, I needed to know ahead of time, and vice versa and all of that. My boyfriend and I had sort of the primary, and we both sort of shared our friend, and we could all fool around, have sex, and that was really great. And unfortunately, the relationship ended between the three of us when they were making out together, and I came upon them in this very dramatic, very Shakespearean, biblical moment of, oh my God, you guys, you're making out, you didn't tell me, and they're like, oh my God, we're caught. And the thing that really upset me the most was that I said, in order to maintain my integrity, I now have to dissolve this relationship because that's what I said I was going to do. And I maintained that boundary. And I asked my boyfriend, I said, well, can you promise me that this isn't going to happen again? And he was like, probably. And of course, this was also the beginning of the end of my relationship with him, thankfully. But I learned a very important lesson about boundaries, and I did that on my own. The thing is this, most people are not going to necessarily learn about their sexuality, learn how to fuck, learn how to love, and learn how to love more richly and better by reading a document, by reading a blog. It is my belief that it is what we do and how we live that is the most educational. This is the main reason that I am so obnoxiously loud and out about my private life. Because I feel that people can learn better from my example than from anything I have ever written deliberately to the point of educating people. So my question for all of you here is, what are you doing to educate that's not what you put on your blog or what you teach in a class? What are you bringing to the rest of the fucking world that they need to see? When I first came out into kink and BDSM and I went to my first play party, there were 300 people there. How many people of color do you think were there in that room? Wild guess. Well, there were 2. You're wrong! There was myself and one other black girl, and people were like, from across the room, but we were both in service and we had to be very respectful and very quiet, so we had to like keep it on the down low, you know? Just like real slaves back in the day. Yeah, she said it. It's just gonna get worse, so like buckle up. So the fact is this, at that point I had taken several classes, at that point I had been involved in kink for a while, and I realized that this was the whitest environment in which I had ever been. White, 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 white. So many white people. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that per se, but there is when so many people are not realizing that that's the case. And when I said, hey, you know, how many other people of color are there around? And everyone sort of had to pause and think about the fact that there weren't any. They would point to the same two people. There was one black dominant guy who taught classes on knife play, and there was one Asian woman who taught classes on rope bondage, and that was pretty much all I saw in the community in the Bay Area in the 90s, which pissed me off. Because I was like, well, this is not cool. Where's the diversity? What's going on? They were like, well, if you don't like it, you should do something about it. Which is the wrong thing to say to me. Because I'm one of those other idiots who's like, I'm actually going to do something about it. And so I did. So I started teaching and I started sharing and I started talking about my own experience. And I did this with some trepidation because my experience was so specific and so singular and so difficult, I didn't see what the point of what was just of sharing it. Why am I going to get in front of a room full of white people and talk to them about my shit? Why do they care? Why am I going to do that to myself? It's exhausting. I will tell you, having to educate people constantly is very exhausting. But what I realized is that whole the personal is political thing is very much fucking true. No one else has my journey or my struggle. No one else has your journey or your struggle either. And so platitudes and generalities are fine, but sharing what personally makes you, you, is the most important thing of all. When I realized and I started to tell people, you know, I'm submissive, I identify as submissive, and they thought, well, that's great. And I said, I'm also black, as you can see. I'm not in the closet about that anymore. I've been out for a while, so it's I publicly identify as black. Just so you know, if you're going to tweet it, it's all right. I'm not, you know. And what was interesting to me was how many people had not considered how impactful that is on my sexuality. How difficult it was for me to say, not only do I consider myself a feminist, not only do I consider myself black, I consider myself also a submissive and a slave, and if you don't see this war and the battlefield raging in my head and in my heart as a result of that, then you severely lack imagination. Because it was huge, okay? It's very difficult to say, I am submissive at all. If people see you as a powerful person, more importantly, if you see yourself as a powerful person. And then to play with imagery that has to do with actual killing, murdering, rape, shaming, and a nightmare that occurred to my ancestors. This is not abstract. This is not a fucking game. This is in my body, okay? For hundreds of years, for generations, this sexuality that so many of my friends play with delightfully is in my body. When I walk into a junction and I see someone referring to someone as their master, I get a flinch that to this day I have not lost. I actually very rarely refer to my owner as my master. I use owner because it's less charged for me, personally. I don't use slave so often because I understand that that comes with a huge wheelbarrow and for me a body full of baggage. So I started explaining this to people and folks were sort of like, oh, it never occurred to me. You know why? Because they hadn't spoken to any other black submissives. Maybe there were one or two folks, there were some people who were my predecessors in the leather community, who were African American, who had sort of blazed that trail, but the trails need to be blazed over and over and over again, because our memory is short, our body memory is short, our collective memory is very short to the point of non-existence, almost. And we need to see the same example set repeatedly over and over again. We need to see you doing what you do and living your life in a way that is effective, in a way that is in line with what you're actually preaching. You need to practice what you are actually preaching. And so as I came up in the leather, in the kink community, I realized that despite the fact that I thought that my story was so specific and of no interest to everyone else, it was of amazing interest to other people because everyone has their own struggle. It might not look as epic and it might not seem as dramatic as mine, but you all have them. And the thing that I have found about living a public life is that we can inspire and move people in ways that are even more impactful than standing in front of a room full of people and teaching a class, that have even more resonance than writing a book. Because folks will take these lessons to heart because they're not expecting them. If I read someone's post on Facebook, you know, as I'm in bed with one eye open at 4:30 a.m. because I can't fucking sleep, and they're sharing about how miserable and depressed they are because boyfriend number 1 is not at home and boyfriend number 8 is somewhere overseas fucking somebody else and they're having fear of missing out and they're super sad, that vulnerability might not speak to my situation, but it speaks to me as a human being. And this to me is one of the most important things I think we can do as sexuality educators, is to live in front of people. Now, okay, I'm a pervert, so I decided I was a pervert as a result of having an affair with this like super hot British guy back in the day. And I consider myself to be a very sexually liberated person. Hey, I'm like having sex with my boyfriend and my girlfriend when I'm in high school, we're tying each other up, we're doing all kinds of freaky sex shit, what's the big deal? And I didn't realize until I had an orgasm from someone hitting me that there was something else that I wanted in addition to that. Cue the years-long battle with trying to accept this part of myself. And it wasn't an overnight thing. I decided that I was going to try to be a full pervert, a full kinky person. I was going to open myself up to that. And then immediately the bad voices started. What do you think you're doing? You're a black woman. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you play with the history of your ancestors? How dare you put into the same box as a masturbatory fantasy slavery and ownership and being someone submissive, you know? And like night after night I would lay in bed like with these fantasies and I'm just thinking, oh my God, this is super hot. Just waiting, you know, for like the ghost of Martin Luther King to appear at the foot of my bed. You know, I'd be like, we did not march on Washington so you could masturbate to the thought of a white man tying you down, girl. You know, and I'm like, but Dr. King, it's so hot. And so I struggled with this, and the defining moment in the turning for this came when I was talking to this guy I had this hot affair with, and I said, you know, I feel really kind of bad about even thinking about this stuff. I said, I really don't think I should go forward. I was talking about maybe going to find actual kinky people and do kinky stuff. And he finally said, so you're not going to do this because you're black? That's not racist? And I was like, mind blown. Thank you, white guy. For making it so easy. Which it was not, but what was interesting to me was that that helped me to figure out a way into my issue. Which is to say, by depriving myself of this because it was allegedly disrespectful to my heritage and my reality, am I not doing myself a disservice? The likelihood that I was the only kinky black woman on the planet was very low. And I wondered why I had not seen myself represented. I wondered why when I opened any magazine about kinky sex, when I looked at any books about this, I wasn't seeing myself. And I thought, you know, it probably is not because we're not out here. It's because we're not in control of the message. And if we're not in control of the message, we are never going to be out here because white people cling tenaciously to power everywhere. Even if it's just in the bedroom, even if it's just in the sexuality conference. Look around right now, how many people of color are here? When you go to parties, when you look for partners at events, how white is it? How diverse is it or is it not? Don't think that just because we're in Vienna that this is misrepresentative of the reality, because this room, these demographics are the same all over the world. I promise you, really, let me tell you this. And those of you who have been around the world will nod and say, yeah, it's pretty much the same shit everywhere. And what are the reasons for that? You know, people talk a lot about, what can we do to foster diversity? What can we do? I said, what you can do is elevate our voices. Inviting me here is a great thing to do. If you yourself have any control over any programming anywhere, are you bringing in different voices, different people? And the thing is that while you might think that this does not make a difference, it does. It's huge to see yourself represented. It's amazing to hear your voice. And not just because, we're fabulous and we love to hear ourselves speak, but also because that person who isn't in the room, when they find out, when they see themselves in the space, in the dialogue, it makes an amazing and huge difference. And it's helped me to start to understand that what I was doing actually was important outside of myself. I have pretty severe social anxiety, which you're looking at me up here on stage and thinking, how is that possible? But the fact of the matter is that I'm also an actor and a performer, and I have been that since I was 5 years old. I'm now 48. So you can do the math, that's how many years I have been performing in front of people for money and selling myself. And when I was a kid, it was a necessity because my family was very poor, and every job that I got meant that that was another month's rent we could pay. So I sold myself rather effectively because I had to. And so part of what I do right now is I push myself because I feel as though I have to. I feel as though if I don't stand up and speak, that's one less voice that's out there being heard, What has that done for me as a human being? What's kind of amazing about it is that it's very easy to look at your freaky sex practices or your alternative sex practices if the word freaky is too intense for you, or if you just don't like it. A lot of people get really upset when I use the word pervert. They're like, oh, but we're not perverts. And look it up. It's an amazing word. Let's take it back because we are perverting the dominant paradigm, which sucks, as we all know very intimately. But the fact of the matter is, it's incredibly necessary for us to do these things in front of each other and then in front of other people. A lot of people think that a lot of what we do in terms of alternative sexuality is performative, especially kinky sex, right? What are we doing in front of other people? Why are you showing off your stuff? My first answer to that is because it's necessary. People need to see it. People need to see themselves. I never thought of myself as someone who could change someone else's mind by living my life. I never thought of myself as a warrior or a rebel or a fighter at all until I started doing BDSM and kink activity. Because what I realized is, miraculously, my existing was an act of rebellion. My showing up to an event was something that was radical. And we have, each of us, ways to radicalize our lives that we are definitely not taking advantage of. So I encourage you and I invite you to find ways in your life that what you can do, what you are doing, is radical and invites other people in. Because inviting more people in is what I believe we really need to do. It's one of the reasons why I was so sad to see so many kinky folks so enraged at the 50 Shades of Grey thing. Because everyone's like, oh, now every housewife in America is going to be out there trying to get some dominant blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, thank God, because they need it. Who needs this more than the people who are trapped in lives that they didn't fully choose of their own free will? So many people fall into lives because that's the track that's laid out for them. We here have probably at some point made a decision actively to go and find something else, but many other people don't. And I believe it's not fair, and it's rather elitist than elitist in a bad way, to assume that just because people haven't made a decision yet that they don't deserve to. That because they didn't come into kink some other way, that somehow, because they watched 50 Shades of Grey, and now they want to be kinky, that that's sullied somehow, that that's somehow less awesome, or less romantic, or less real. And I actually believe quite the opposite. I think it is not just as real, I think it's more real because it's also organic for them. However people come into what they're coming into is just how it has to be, yeah? So one of the things that I mentioned when I was trying to figure out what to write for the intro to this thing, I was like, I don't know what to write, I hate these, I just want to get up and talk to the people, which is what I'm doing right now. Is the idea that what we do is somehow at odds with what's expected to us. The dichotomy of someone saying, I identify as a submissive, I identify as a slave, I identify as a bottom, I identify as someone who is deeply into service, and whether or not that is at odds with freedom, whether or not that is at odds with being fully invested in who you are. One of the first things I started hearing when I started saying, hey, I'm a pervert, this is great, this is awesome, is people saying, how can you be a feminist if you are submissive? Clearly, you have just been suckered into the dominant paradigm of being submissive to the male patriarchy, and it just starts to become quacking after a certain point. I'm like, yeah, thank you for that. And I had to actually think about it because I had a voice inside that was saying the exact same thing to me as well. And so I went back to the roots and I said, what does feminism mean to me? And to me it was pretty simple. It meant that I got to decide what was right for me as a woman. I got to decide what being a woman meant. And I get to live my life with that integrity. There are bigger and fancier definitions, and I'm sure some of you have even written bigger and fancier definitions. Mad respect for y'all, but I need to function with something simpler. I have too many hamsters in my brain at one time. And I thought about being submissive, and I thought about living my life as I wanted to live it. And I said, what is more feminist? To adhere to a belief system that someone else has established, this is how feminism is, or for me to say, this is what my life as a woman looks like, this is how I am most fulfilled, and therefore this is what I am going to do, and obviously I chose the latter, right? And the reason for that is because it never feels right to me to tell people how to live their lives. And so why am I going to allow someone else to do that to me, which is what I was so ready to do, which is to me anti-feminism. And this was the first bit of crack I had in my head that maybe these people who call themselves feminists were actually not all having my best interest at heart. Wasn't that amazing? You know? And I started to crack that open. I started to think about living out loud, mostly out of loneliness. Because I said, I am not seeing myself represented, but I know that I'm out there. How do I find other people who identify as women who also are like me? I'm not finding it sitting at home. I'm not finding it on AOL chat rooms, because that's how grim it was back in the 90s. What can I do? And that's actually why I started teaching classes, because I said, you know, I'm not seeing submissive women teaching. I'm not seeing us in positions where we're sharing our knowledge. And many people would say, well, because, you know, you're submissive. That's not what submissives do. And I'm like, what do you mean that's not what submissives do? How do you know? I haven't even done anything yet. Oh my God. So I started teaching classes because I said, if you are going to be engaged in relationships with people, maybe you want to know an opinion from the other side of the whip. Perhaps that could be helpful to you. And then I was invited to teach a class at a polyamory group. And you think, oh, why the monogamous girl? I said, because I was involved serially with polyamorous people, because that was pretty much all you got in the kink community in San Francisco in the 90s. Everyone was poly. Everyone was bi. Everyone was a switch. Because the Bay Area is some greedy-ass motherfucker. And everyone's like, how can I make sure every single possible flow is open to me? Bi, poly, switch! And so I had several partners who were polyamorous, and everyone would say, well, it's doomed, it's a disaster for you to get involved with this monogamous girl. She's just gonna want more, she did this and this and that. People were dooming it from the start. And the actual truth is, I have been engaged in fairly intense serious relationships, mono-poly relationships, 3 times. And in all 3 of those cases, what's hilarious, shocking, it wasn't the poly features that caused the meltdown in the relationship. It was the usual shit. Emotional unavailability, or emotional unavailability, and occasionally emotional unavailability. Really? Which, raise your hand if you think that's unique to monogamous relationships, or unique to polyamorous relationships. This is a human thing. And so people were like, oh my gosh, wait, the monogamous girl has something to say about polyamory? Skeptic. No, I had plenty to say about it. And what was interesting was that once people's heads cracked open a little bit, other folks started thinking, hey, maybe I can do that too. Hey, wait a second, I've been in relationships with other monogamous people. I'm going to talk about what that's like from the poly point of view. And I started seeing more of those. I'm not to say that I created this and I invented this, but my coming into it in my community at that time was really very important because it got people thinking in different ways. And this is part of the reason why I encourage people to live out loud, because if I had not asked that question of the community at large, I would not have gotten the responses and the answers that I did. I would not have been able to have as fulfilling and as satisfactory relationships as I did, you know? And as I eventually learned, I actually found that I was not necessarily monogamous because I did like playing with other folks. And I had this whole discussion about whether or not monogamy and polyamory really jive, because polyamory is about loving multiple people, monogamy is about being married to one person, and so I now identify myself as monoamorous. Because I actually love one person at a time, but you know, if I meet someone who's super cool and they're really into rope bonds, I'd be like, oh my God, please tie me up. Please make sure my owner is there too, because he really likes watching that. It's one of his things, blah, blah, blah. So what I discovered was that there are more ways and more words to be who we are than our sort of limited understanding can let us have at first. Questioning is always very important. Stepping outside of your own silo is always very important. These are lessons that I learned coming up in the kink community. And what was interesting to me was that the deeper I got into kink and into BDSM, the more I realized that I had what I felt like was a duty, actually, a compulsion to share more and more and more. Partially because I'm just obsessive compulsive about talking about my own shit, as anyone who follows me on Facebook knows, but also because I saw the amazing benefit and the amazing result of doing that. And I promise you that if you go through the world and you move through the world, and part of what you're doing is fetishizing sharing, the results will be amazing and fantastic. Not just amazing and fantastic in terms of meeting more people, sidebar, great way to meet people, you know, is to be publicly owning your shit. But it's also amazing how much more confident I feel about my own stuff when I'm able to say, this is who I am, and I have no fear or shame of sharing it. One of the other benefits to this, one of the other things that's super freeing is, I have nothing to lose. Especially people who are involved in kink and BDSM, people who are leading alternative lifestyles, if you're polyamorous, there are risks involved in being out. Not everyone can be out. I have friends who I know personally, firsthand, who have lost custody of children, who have lost jobs, because they are not out. So if you are someone who does not have anything to lose, you are also doing a public service by being out and being public about who you are. It's demonstrably true that the more exposure people have to things that are different, the less scary they are. Yeah? It's a human thing for people to be nervous about something they don't know or don't understand. If you don't know a polyamorous family, then when you hear about 3 moms and 2 dads and 1 uncle mom, maybe you're a little bit nervous. You think the child will think about the children and the welfare of the children. Versus, you know the people across the street are living that life and they seem cool and the kid seems fine, and then maybe they have, like, instead of like a helicopter mom, like a squadron of helicopters over there. Like, that's the worst case scenario, actually. But that type of understanding permits us to open our hearts a little bit. And that's very liberating. For me, as a kinky, submissive, African-American / black female identified fat girl, add all that together, I felt like there was no one like me and no one who was going to understand what I had to say. And then over the past couple decades, I have realized it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if anyone is like me exactly, because people can and will identify with some aspect of who I am. Whether or not you are dealing with monogamous folks and you're discussing polyamory, it doesn't really matter, because everyone has had that feeling of having to split their time and attention. People might be married to a job and a spouse, for example. People might have issues with connection with their family that are as charged and as difficult as having a triad situation. People will take the lessons that you have and apply them to other parts of their lives. People are wily like that. It's amazing. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I've been sober since, you know, this is, you laugh, but actually I have a tattoo of my sobriety date, and that's because my brain is so fried. I'm always like, was it 2007, or when was it? It was 2007. So I just celebrated 10 years sober. And I used to not, I used to not think that that had anything to do with my sexuality, my sex life, my anything, nothing. I separated those things. I was like, here I am over here doing my sober thing, here I am over here doing my sex thing. And then over the course of the past few years, I realized, first of all, there are a whole lot of people in recovery in the alternative lifestyle communities, first of all. Second of all, the degree of radical honesty that is required for you to remain sober crosses over into negotiating your sexual relationships in a way that is astounding. When I started talking to people about how you can't fuck with yourself if you're going to stay sober, and take that and move that over into negotiating a relationship with multiple people, how you can't fuck with yourself and you'd better have your shit together before you go and bringing it to someone else, light bulbs started going off. And I said, bring everything in your life to the table. Don't think that being fat has nothing to do with your sexuality. Don't think that speaking 3 languages has nothing to do with your sexuality. Don't think that being gender non-conforming has nothing to do with the wider universe of kink and BDSM and polyamory, because it all does. The silo thing is real, and we need to really break that down and see how who we are as whole and complete people informs our capacity to educate and bring our message to the greater world. Because when people see you as a whole person, they give a deeper shit about, that sounds really, that's not, they give more of a shit, they cared more deeply, that's just That's one of those points where like the one brain hamsters in your brain like, yeah, deeper shit, say that. He's like, no hamster, don't say that. People care so much more about a whole human in front of them than they do about your marketing image. I will tell you honestly, I know hundreds of people who are in this industry, in this field, doing all this stuff, and most of them are blind to me until I see that one person's 3 a.m. post about how depressed they are about X, Y, or Z. Then I start to care, and then I want to listen to what they have to say. I don't give a fuck what Tony Robbins and his teeth have to say to me. Not one fuck. But if I meet a person who says to me, here's my thing, and then afterwards they're like, oh my God, I really have social anxiety, that was really hard for me, and then I go, oh my God, me too. How do you cope with that? Now we have a connection, now I care. I don't want to hear about the person with the perfect polycule who's never jealous, who always has time for everyone. Who is that motherfucker? I want to hear about the person who had to cut someone out of their life because they just didn't have the time and that broke them. That's where I learned something. That's where the reality comes into play. And we all have stuff that we tuck away and we hide because we're embarrassed, because we don't want to damage the brand. I guarantee you, the brand, if it is solid, will hold up against your humanity. And that's what people are looking for, and that's what people want to see, and that's what we need to bring to the table, is the capacity to be radically ourselves and to do it in a way that other people can appreciate, see, and connect with. It's astounding how much happens when you start to tell your story. You know, and I am a professional storyteller, so I am biased in that way. But I will also tell you, I have gotten up just to tell a funny story about fucking. And then afterwards, people come up to me crying, going, oh my God, I just remembered this really pivotal moment in my life, blah, blah, blah. I didn't get up to tell a story because I wanted someone to have an epiphany. I got to tell a story because it was funny. You know, it's hilarious about that time that my boyfriend grabbed my fat belly while we were fucking. And it's great that it helped me to overcome my anxiety about being fat while fucking. But what was amazing is that it allowed other people to realize that they actually wanted to overcome anxiety about being fat while fucking. And then we had this whole discussion. And then I got invited to do a photo shoot with sexy fat people. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna do that. And now I'm on like calendars and posters and shit all over the place. And I'm like, oh my God, And I'll reveal a little secret. I don't sit there drooling over how hot I look. I'm like, ooh, I wish that roll of fat was a little further down. I critique my own fat. That's how hilarious it becomes. But what's amazing is that other people with fat bodies see that and they feel better. This whole thing, we're not responsible for each other. There's that whole, is it the 4 agreements? It's like you can't take anything personally and all this stuff. I have issues with that. If you love it, that's great. But things sometimes should be taken personally. Because so much of what we do is very personal. It's personal for me to pose naked. It's personal for me to share about issues I have in my master-slave relationship. It is extremely personal. And I do it with trepidation every time. But every single time, I feel as though what I'm saying is me shouting into a well. Some one person from the internet I don't know says, you don't know me, you never heard from me, but I was on adipositivity.com and I saw a picture of you with your husband and you were fat, middle-aged people hugging and it looked so sweet. And thank you for doing that. You know, this is why I do that, because that allows me to be free to be more myself. I do need external validation. All those of you who are like 100% you don't need any external validation. You are so self-actualized and so grounded. You are just you, and all of you are you-ness all the time. All your chakras are fucking sparkling and shit. That is fantastic, but me, myself, I am like a quivering, tiny marshmallow peep. Going, please love me, please. Please love me. You know, at the same time, putting out the big sparkly electron shell so that you will love me because isn't this person great? You know? And so explaining that dichotomy, that break, that vulnerability is very important because so many of us see ourselves there. As educators, it's not just about what's on the page or on the blog or what you say on stage. It is about who you are. I have a much deeper level of trust for people whose authenticity I feel than I do for people whose articles are interesting. And I feel like if we can be out there, and if you're doing this for a living, or you're trying to do this for a living, or this is a part of who you are, this is a part of the letters after your name, you're already pretty out there. Take it further. Consider what you have to lose and what you have to gain. Think about the fact that everything that we see is it's smaller even than the tip of the iceberg ratio. What you put out there in public is such a small percentage of who you actually really are. Lift some of that up. Show a little bit more. Let us see you do the work, because that also helps people, possibly, arguably, even more than the shiny, happy, perfect exterior, right? It's a lot harder to be authentic. It's a lot more difficult to show how fucked up you are or how you have come from a fucked up place. That is incredibly difficult, and it's incredibly rewarding, and you will do and fulfill your mission in a way that is transcendent if you are able to do that. One of the things I have found when I spent many years single, I spent many years as a submissive, not with a partner, which sucks. Because part of my whole thing is being in service and doing stuff for people, and I have no one to do stuff for. I feel a little bit lost at sea. What do I do? Well, I became a favorite dinner guest for my friends because I was always washing dishes. People be like, have Mo over, she'll wash the dishes, it's part of her fetish, I don't get it, but it's cool. Like non-kink identified people were like, that's amazing. How do I get me one of you? And I'm just like, oh, we seem easy to care for, but we're actually very complicated. Just true, everyone thinks like someone's gonna come over in a maid's outfit and like scrub their toilet for free and not expect anything. I don't expect much, just your soul. So what I started to do actually was to look at everything that I did as service. Teaching a class was service. I'm in service to the room. I'm here for these folks to do whatever it is the universe needs for them to hear today. I would work at parties as a service. I would look around and see who needed help with an event or whatever else. So I channeled that energy into service for the broader community. which in a way was kind of amazing because it freed me up from feeling sorry for myself for being single. Because I was very much at the time attached to the idea that as a submissive, as a slave-identified person, if I didn't have anyone I was serving currently, then I did not exist. And that's a very difficult place to come from. But when I shifted my perspective and said, wait a second, I'm in service to everybody, constantly. This is part of who I am. Therefore, I don't have to worry about being single. It's not my problem. I'll let the universe handle it. There we go. You find me a person. And, 20 years later, they do. The universe is hella slow sometimes. But what's great about it is that when you do get what you want, if you've waited for it, then you tend to be more ready, more appreciative, and more open to what you have. I tell people all the time, if I had met my current owner when I was maybe 10 years younger, first of all, I would still be an active alcoholic. Not a good look for someone in service. He wouldn't have been in the place where he was in his life. And part of what was important for both of us was to be exactly where we were at that time, in order to be free enough to accept each other as we were fully. That's the big thing right there. Part of what I see as an amazing and fantastic dichotomy is the smaller your messaging gets, the more impactful it is. The more specific what you have to say is, the more impactful it is. The fewer people you are trying to include and reference in your own story, the more it is about you and what you have experienced. 100% of the time, I guarantee you, the more people will identify with it because it's honest, because it's real. That is what people crave. We live in a time when bullshit is running everything. Everything. And it's killing people. Right? For those of us living in the US especially, the accelerated level of the nightmare of bullshit is remarkable. Not surprising, not shocking, but remarkable, so therefore I'm remarking upon it. Yeah. Authenticity, you saying this is my story and I'm going to share it despite the fact that it scares the shit out of me to put myself out there, is so fucking radical and so needed right now. Fascism sucks and everything about it is terrible, but let me tell you a short story about my owner, who is a composer. He's an Austrian dude. And most of you never heard of him because most of you are not weirdo new music aficionados, but look him up if you want. He grew up in Styria, and his family were not on the side of my family in World War II. 3 generations. He's the 3rd generation of people who were not on my family's side of the war. He was raised in a family of folks who believed that Hitler was the dude. And, Grandma would tell stories of the time she met him, and eyes would mist over. Incredible. So he, until he was about 20, believed that the Holocaust was, not a thing that happened, was incredibly racist, bigotist, prejudiced, all that stuff. Huge issue. I think Americans don't understand how Austria sort of Germany was like, mea culpa, we fucked up, here's what we're gonna do. And Austria was sort of like, we're gonna have this tart. Apricots, it's very delicious. And we were also victims too. And when he was about 20 or so, he had a series of experiences that sort of shifted his perspective. One was he had an old school friend who was deeply Catholic, very religious, and hammered at him about how everything his parents and grandparents had told him and had done was wrong and bad. And then he was with a school friend and met the school friend's mom, and had one of these awkward moments when you're like a teenager and you're with a parent and you're like, what the fuck do I say to them, sitting in a room waiting around? And so he started asking her about her family. He goes, oh, did you have any other kids besides, my friend? And she said, well, I had a son who was lost in the breaking. And she used some sort of euphemism because no one talks about the Holocaust. especially not in the 60s and 70s in Austria. And he said, when he describes this, that just something opened over him, like a hole, like a hole, a vortex, some energy shifted for him. And he realized that something about everything he had learned was wrong. And that was the first sort of opening for him. And then all the stuff that his friend had been saying had room to really hit him. And the third part was him discovering music. And he realized that you cannot love John Cage and be a fascist. You cannot listen to contemporary music and be someone who thinks that there is a right and wrong way to do art. This shifted his perspective. And so when I talk to people about sex, and people are like, oh, well, sex, it's all this sort of like, who has free time? Who has the money to do all this stuff? Everyone needs to know about how to do it differently. What we are doing is important now. Living a relationship that does not look like a white heterosexual monogamous lifestyle is important now. People need to see it. People need to see how to do themselves individually, because everything, at least in my country right now, is trying to tell us that what you're doing as the individual is wrong, that anything different than the norm is not okay. Programs are being defunded, human rights are being rolled back. What we do as people who are freaky freaky-freeliacs is that we show folks that we exist and we're here, and that what we're doing is not just okay, it lifts us up and gives us a freedom and a joy and a power that you will not enjoy living in a fascist fucking state. Yeah? And so I hope that you all have moments of doubt. I hope that all of you sometimes wonder why you're doing what you're doing, and what the fucking point of this is, and all the money that you spent on all the degrees and all the trips and all of the books is for. And I hope that when you have those moments of doubts, one of the things you will take with you is that what you are doing actually can help save the fucking world. You being you saves the world. I recently read an article about how sneaky it is for fascism to take over, for governments to suddenly be run by one person who does not have good ideas. And one of the first things that this guy said was not resisting. Not saying, no, wait a second, when new rules or new things roll in. Obviously, we all have already practiced not resisting. We're actually a type of vanguard in not being normal, in not following the rules. There's plenty that other folks can learn from us. There are many different ways to be a rebel. There are hundreds of ways to demonstrate that you are your own individual human being, and sexuality is a powerful and beautiful one. Having multiple lovers is a great way to fight oppression. Being a kinky pervert is a great way to show people that you can be who you are. I have this tattoo of my sobriety date because when people ask me what this tattoo means, I can say, it means I'm an alcoholic and I almost drank myself to death. When people ask me why I have this collar on, and I would go through airport security, I say, I can't take it off, it belongs to my husband. And they're like, woo, go through. Those small moments add up. Is there anyone here who doesn't have in their life a moment that seemed innocuous and unimportant, that to this day you pull out and you're like, this was the moment that I realized X? We all have those. You can each be that for someone else. You can be the person who says and does the one thing that helps someone else find themselves. And that's an important gift. And the thing is that you need to feel good about yourself to do it, because you might never be told that you changed that person's life. But I am here to tell you that you are doing it. And this is part woo, but it's also statistical. So it's science, damn it. Science and woo. This is why it is important for you to realize what it is about you that makes you who you are, that you can share with the world, how it is at odds with the dominant paradigm, and what you're going to do to bring that message forward. Because it is so important that you do so, and each and every one of you has that light. Otherwise, you really wouldn't be here. You really wouldn't. You wouldn't give enough. Now I'm just about to bring out the shit metaphor again. Don't do it. That one hand's just like, God damn it. I almost had her talking about a serious shit again. But you would not be here trying to figure out how to make the world a better place if you didn't care to do so, yeah? And so part of what I feel is very important is to find the part of you that feels to you wrong, bad, difficult, unformed, rough, shameful. Because I feel that most of us have it. Some folks don't. Some folks are 100% down the checklist with everything about themselves. But I think that most of us have the thing that we're tucking away. And I encourage you to bring that thing out. The one thing that you think, that you feel makes you fucked up or wrong or bad. The one thing that triggers that anxiety for you. Because if you have the guts to share that with the rest of the world, people will see that and find it within themselves. One of the things that I had happened to me when I was getting sober, I was actually in a detox, in a rehab, on medication, fucked up as hell, and long story short, a hyena appeared out of the floor in my room and said, "Hey, hi, my name is Bubbles, nice to meet you, and what we're gonna do right now is walk out of this rehab and drink." And I said, "Ooh, wow, okay." Now, usually it's little pink elephants that the cartoon characters see when they're drunk, right? But this is far less cute and far more terrifying. And so I had conversations, long conversations with this creature about how I needed to go and drink. And I assumed I was going crazy. I talked to the therapist and I said, "I think I'm having a psychotic episode." And she said, "Oh, no, you're fine." Now, I didn't tell her about the hyena, but I sort of talked around it. I was like, what if I were seeing things? What if I were hearing voices? That's not like, and she was like, you're detoxing, you were really fucked up, you almost died, it's normal. You know, then as that continued, I was like, no, seriously. Kind of fucked up. And I spoke to a therapist who was like, there's a form of Gestalt therapy where you externalize your bad thing, and you deal with it externally, and then you reincorporate it. I was like, but isn't that crazy? And she was like, no, you saved yourself thousands of dollars. And then I spoke to like my woo weird priest friends, and they were like, oh, you've manifested your dark side. I'm like, no. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a rabbi, and I was like, the rabbi will talk sense to me, and she was like, who had visions of creatures and weird things, prophets. And I was like, wrong answer, rabbi. I didn't tell anyone about this for like a year. I was like, this is ridiculous, this is fucked up, I'm clearly losing my mind and no one will just tell me. So finally one day, in a AA meeting, I was like, my name is Mollena and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Mollena. And so I said, I have conversations with this hyena demon thing. And everyone's sort of like, And then someone raised their hand and I'm like, I have conversations with this evil creature, but it's my mom. Someone else was like, I have conversations with, and we went around the room and everyone had their own demon. It was like some sort of cartoon where suddenly everyone looks under their chair and there's some evil creature like, I'm like, go back, and I was like, and I actually now have a tattoo of this hyena on my arm to remind me of this nightmare and also to remind me of how to love the part of me that is ugly. Everyone has not been in rehab on 8 types of medications to stop them from seizures that might kill them, talking to hyenas. Everyone has had that dark moment where they are terrified for their sanity. Everyone has not almost drunk themselves to death, but everyone has had something that they felt was pulling them towards the edge. When I first told this story, with many more bells, whistles, and frills, at a storytelling event, I had a line of people literally out the door afterwards just who wanted to come up to me and say, thank you. I am in recovery. My husband, my wife, my sister, my friend, my whatever. This touches everybody. Everything that we do touches someone in a way that you cannot expect. If you censor yourself, if you are afraid that you don't make sense, if you are afraid that you are too complicated, you are depriving the world of your incredibly beautiful and unique story. So I encourage you to embrace the parts of you that don't make sense and to share them, because that's how we're going to save the world, ultimately. Thank you.